All right, a little bit on the 16th century before we get to the Grunwald Peace. So France and the Holy Roman Empire, oh my goodness, is basically Germany at the time, is expanding their territories up into Netherlands. And Spain is the dominant power in Europe at the time, so they have their Spanish Netherlands. Monarchs increased their power over their subjects and created strong cultural and political unity. Europe was primarily Catholic until the Reformation. I won't go into the Reformation. We've already talked about that. However, I do want you to know that a lot of the reason for what had happened is that the Protestants wanted the source of the faith to come from the Bible, not the church's council, not the church's laws, not the rituals that went with the church, but the Bible. And Martin Luther produced the first translation of the Bible in a vernacular language, which is also important because then other languages, you could read it in English or you could read it in German, not just Latin. The main thing I want you to get out of the Reformation, how it relates to us in our history, is the difference in imagery. There's a big difference in the way that Protestants had imagery, which was very little, if none, except in small, inexpensive prints that were extremely useful as teaching aids. In the Catholics, they used grand decoration. When we think of it as communicating with God or communicating with Mary, whereas the Protestants at the time, they viewed it as idolatry and led to iconoclasm, which mostly happened in the northern areas in Germany, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. Okay, so this piece is actually in France. Grunwald, the piece that we're going to talk about. And let's kind of get to it. It's a complicated piece. There's a lot to this piece. It is a polytic, meaning that there are more than 3 pieces. It looks like there's only 3 pieces, but it has 3 different views. So this is one, then there's another because it opened up and it kind of falls back on each other, and then it opens up again. And so anyway, so let's talk about this. This is, Matthias was a Renaissance man, just like Da Vinci. He was a court painter, he was a decorator, he was an architect. He, in fact, was a hydraulic engineer. He created this for a monastic hospital called the Order of St. Anthony's, and it's in Inselheim. So this would have been created prior to Martin Luther's 95 Theses. This is an altarpiece, and it consists of 3 parts, just like I said. There is a part in the altarpiece that is it's carved and painted, and it's very ornate. But this is obviously the painted, it's painted on board. So it was placed in the choir of the church, so behind the altar, and so the church is in a monastery, and then the hospital in a hospital, and so there, you know how a hospital will have a church. Well, that's what this is, and it's placed inside that church in the hospital. Okay, so when you're looking at this, I want you to sort of think back to this little German piece, because it's the same kind of very in your face. This is, it's the same sort of imagery, and that, and all the crucifixions that I've seen, I've never seen one quite so graphic. And it's the same type of view that you're supposed to be getting pity, and you're supposed to have empathy. And if you're really sick, you're supposed to have this feeling of a miraculous healing, or in hope that there's a miraculous healing, or if not, that at least there's salvation at the end. So again, this is located in the hospital, and it's this hospital is primarily there to treat diseases of the skin, which was called St. Anthony's fire, and it sounds like it was an absolutely horrible disease. St. Anthony's fire is called ergotism, I think is that how you pronounce it. It's ergotism, and this disease comes from the fungus that grows on grain, primarily rye. And so I want you to think about the area in which we are in In France, where it's wet and rainy, and if water gets into the grain, certainly fungus is going to grow, and you're still going to make stuff out of it, right? You're going to make bread out of it, and you're going to eat it, and then it's going to cause this horrible oozing boils, a distended stomach, withering extremities. So your legs and arms are going to wither, and convulsions and gangrene resulted, which led to amputation of the extremities. So your legs and arms are going to have to be cut off. Horrible, horrible disease. So this is in the predella, which is in the bottom portion, and this is a lamentation. We've studied the lamentation before when we studied Giotto, when we studied way back in December, when we were looking at Proto-Renaissance, or the very end of the Middle Ages. And so it opens up here in the center. And so when it opened, it would, it would go this way and then this way. And it kind of looks like Jesus's legs are amputated when you're opening it. And again, this is a reminder that there's hope, that there's eternity, there's salvation on the other end. So, again, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of pain. Look at the cross and how rough it is. And we can see that rigor mortis has set in. This is very graphic. Look at the crown of thorns and the blood that it's causing. It's dripping down on Jesus's, through his chest and his stomach and onto his loincloth, which is really tattered and worn. And his skin color, it's almost greenish, and it's very it's nasty. And this is definitely, you're emphasizing the pain, the suffering. And look at the skies. This, in biblical, if you read this part of his crucifixion, the skies turn black and there's a big storm that takes place. Then look at the lamb here. And look at what's coming out of his neck here. And it's going right into the chalice. If that's not an imagery of the blood of Christ, I don't know what is. And the Eucharist. This is John the Baptist, and he is pointing at Christ. And in Latin, there's an inscription on the right of him that says, Christ destiny as the Redeemer, his own as precursor. So, there we have it. Let's flip to the other view. This is the Annunciation and the Resurrection. This is an interior panel. So the other one flaps open, and then it reveals this one, which is a very different view. The mood changes. It changes from disaster to triumph. So let's talk about this expressive light, this lots of yellow that's going on here. Obviously, the risen Christ is here. And we see the cloud next to it above where Mary is. And it's just free-flowing and rich, iridescent colors. And this looks, to me, when you look at this, looks very Venetian because of the bright colors. Here on the bottom you see the soldiers after his rising up. Here looks like the Annunciation. Let's go to the next panel. This is just a close-up of what's happening. The Annunciation and the Resurrection. Here is the carved panel. And this is St. Anthony Abbot and Augustine and Jerome in the center there. These are warning panels. So, and I guess it's supposed to increase devotion to the hospital for the patients and the monks that work there. So let's talk a little bit about them. So on the right is the temptation of St. Anthony, and he depicts this ghoulish beast and who were attacking by the saints. You can see how they're, they've got a club or whatever here raised, and they're all attacking, and here's the saint down here. And then in the foreground, you have this man